One night he asked me, he says, why are you training in so many different systems? And I told him, Bruce, I'm trying to find the ultimate. He said, man, ain't no ultimate. So he put his finger on my chest and said, the ultimate's in there. And that was the moment that I began to reevaluate everything and realize that I was wasting my time training with other instructors, because all they wanted me to do was to imitate what they would do. My name is Fong. I want to tell my story. I am a martial artist who practiced martial arts since I was 7 years old and dedicated to the art of fighting and living, warriorship. And then in my midlife, I had the opportunity to become a movie maker, a filmmaker. I was able to be a social worker and a counselor. Let's take the first stage, coming to America. My father came to the United States back in the 20s. And like most Chinese in those days, they came to America to make their money and go back to China. They didn't want to stay in America. They felt that it was just a place to make money and their real home is back in China. So he came before us, and then in 1934, he was able to make enough money to bring my mom and I to the United States. So I landed in Seattle, Washington at the detention camp on May the 1st, 1934. And I remember that experience as vivid as I can if it happened yesterday. We were detained at this detention center for 2 weeks. And it's basically what it was. It was not detention, but it was imprisonment for 2 weeks. And finally, we were released, and we took a train all the way from Washington through Montana. Finally, we landed in Chicago, Illinois, where we joined my uncle, who was running a newspaper, Chinese newspaper, in a grocery store. Not only was my uncle, who ran a Chinese grocery store and also a Chinese newspaper publisher, he also owned a restaurant. So he greeted us at the train station, and we stayed for him for a few days. And one of the things that caused me to be bitter and negative about the U.S. was the 2 weeks of detention, and we were like prisoners. However, my uncle decided to take me to the 1934 World's Fair. And so, of course, after visiting all the exhibits and having fun riding all the rides and eating for the first time snow cone and all that stuff, it changed my perception about America. I'd forgotten about the horrible condition at the detention camp. Then after about 3 days living with my uncle, finally we took a train to Parkin, Arkansas. And that's where my father was operating a mom and pop grocery store. Being a small grocery store as Chinese, you are being harassed a lot of time by the prejudice, KKKs and all those terrible organizations. So my dad, not wanting to be weak and giving in to them, he fought back. So what he did was he bought a double-barrel shotgun, and he saw that thing off, and he sat in the rocking chair and sleep with it in his lap. And finally, he found a little town, about 900 population, called Widener, Arkansas. After I grew out of grammar school, I went to high school, and it was no better being raised in Far City, Arkansas. And as I always like to tell people, that when you have the fighting instinct, it's there. And I remember coming off the bus, because usually I heard somebody say, "Hey, Chink." I turned around and the guy said, "This is not your day. I'm gonna cut you up." He had a hunting knife that long in his hand. So instinctively, I grabbed his arm, grabbed him by the neck and spun him around and put him on the first step of the bus where I was, and I pushed him out and fell on top of him, and I didn't even know the word ground and pound, but I was doing the 10 bam, bam, bam. I was desperate. Finally, I noticed he let the knife go in his hand, and it's all not about techniques. It's about intensity and about being a controlled anger. Bruce Lee told me, he said, what you gotta be is be so angry under control. You gotta be mad as hell under control. That's what Bruce Lee said. And you could tell he has intensity. But what changed my whole life was when I was about 17 and a half, I came down with a fever. And the fever hung in there for 2 weeks. And I think I must have had the flu or something, but my dad wanted to treat me with Chinese herbs. And my mother would find the solution to every problem, castor oil. I prayed to God to take the fever away, and I will be a minister or whatever you want me to be. And you know, the prayer worked because my bed was all wet. And then I woke up and I realized my fever had broken. And I said to myself, I said, I guess I have to carry my promise out to God that I'm going to be a minister or whatever. Of course, I went 4 years of college, 3 years seminary, and I graduated in 1954 in Southern Methodist University in Dallas, Texas. And of course, the trick is, after I graduated, the superintendent from the district in Arkansas came down to recruit ministers for the churches in his district. And all my buddies were assigned a church, and they were so happy where they were going. And I'm the only one that was not assigned. And so I said, Brother Dodgen, you know, everybody's been assigned to church, and here it is in June of 1954, I'm graduating. And I said, how come you haven't talked to me about a church? He said, and then he started hesitating, humming and hawing, and said, you know, Brother Fong, it's difficult to find you an appointment. I said, why? He said, we don't have no Chinese churches in Arkansas. I said, but Brother Dodger, I don't speak Chinese. He said, well, you know, we'll take care of you, find you. I arrived on the Greyhound bus to Sacramento, California in 1954 in July. And I got off the bus, and it was 7th and N Street, and all I saw was winos laying on the sidewalk, and I had to walk over them to go to 8th and N Street. And that's where a place I'm supposed to meet Fong, who was no relation to me, but he was a minister for 25 years, but not ordained. He was a lay minister at the Chinese United Methodist Church in Sacramento. And I knew when he told me he had been there 25 years that he was the problem. And I was 25 years old, and I'm going to be his boss. I started asking my district superintendent if they could find me another appointment, give me another appointment, another church, so I can spend my energy more positively. And he said, well, Brother Fong, you're doing a real good job, and blah, 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 blah. But basically, you know why he couldn't transfer me? Because Chinese went to Chinese churches, blacks went to black churches, Mexican went to Mexican churches, and white went to white churches. So even if it was opening in a white church, they wouldn't send me there. And so I said, okay, I know what he's trying to do, telling me I'm doing a good job. He's spending the damn thing. And I said, okay. So you know, the Lord takes care of me. I'm driving down K Street, and I look up, and there was a sign that said Jiu-Jitsu. I backed up, parked the car, ran upstairs. It was Valis Inanda Dance Studio, and in it was the instructor who taught also Jiu-Jitsu. And so I talked to him a while, and I wasn't interested in dancing. I was interested in being knowledgeable in Jiu-Jitsu. And it turned out that he was a student of Bruce Tegner, And some of you who are in the martial arts realize who Bruce Tegner was. He was from Oxnard, California, and he wrote a bunch of books on judo and self-defense and all that. So he was a student of Bruce Tegner. So I started taking lessons from him. After less than a month, I was pinning that sucker down and arm barring him and all that. And then, but we became good friends, and I trained with him for about 5 or 6 months. And so I went over to the YMCA. I heard they had a good judo program over there, and I went there and met a guy named Bob Bendix, and he had been training some of those Olympic guys. I stayed with him until I was a green belt. And one night there was a bunch of old ladies visiting the place, and they went in the judo room. And so Bob said, "You want me to demonstrate to you what judo is?" So he said, "Come here, Fong, throw a punch." So what happened was, I said, "Bang!" And he reached over and there was nothing there. Then he pissed off. He said, "God damn it, don't you know how to throw a punch? Throw a punch." He said, "Hold it out there like that." So I held it like that. He grabbed me and slammed me to the floor. I knew I made him mad, and I didn't go back. After I took wrestling for a while, someone told me that there was a Taekwondo expert at Sacramento State University. They met him. His name was Chong Yuk Yong, and he was a student at Won Ki in Korea. And so he said he would come and train us. So we used the church to train on weekdays. And since this went on for almost a couple of years. Then he told me he graduated from Sacramento State University, and he decided to go back to Korea. I had the news that I was going to be transferred to Fellowship United Methodist Church in Vallejo, California. And so for the first time, I'm going to have my own church. I'm the only minister, but it was a multi-ethnic congregation. It was Filipinos, blacks, Caucasians, and a couple of Chinese. And so it was not a big church, but I was able to be free to be a minister. I decided to take Kung Fu over at San Francisco. So I went there and at the Siloam School, and there was the teacher, T.Y. Wong, sitting on the stool smoking. And he said he was a Sifu. Then I saw a guy over in the corner there doing forms with a light dumbbell. And so I watched him a while, and I said, "This is interesting." And then he after he got through with the set, he put the thing down and came over to me and shook my hand and said, "My name is Jimmy Lee." He said, "Why don't you join the club?" I said, "Well, I'm belong to the Troy Leafoot School down at the park." And then I said, "Well, maybe I should join the school here, because I've been here, I've been down there for a couple of years, and I just want to find out the different styles." And so what happened was, I decided to join, and I trained about 6 or 8 months, and Jimmy was pretty good at writing books on Kung Fu. When I met Jimmy Lee, what I didn't realize that he was a good writer. He had several books he was selling in mail order. And then he and Professor T.Y. Wong collaborated on a book on Siloam Kung Fu. And one day I went to train there, and Jimmy said, "I'm moving out of here." And I said, "If you want to train, I invite you to come to my house, and I'm going to have classes there." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because the professor accused me of stealing $20 from him." I said, "You mean you actually stole some money from him?" No. He claimed that I shortchanged him on selling the books, because I was supposed to split the profit with him. And so I went with Jimmy and trained over there for almost a year over at his garage. And then one day he asked me, he said, "Leo, I'll be at Wally J's luau, and I want to go there because there's a young guy, about 20, 21 years old, he's going to demonstrate." And I said, "What is his name?" He said, "His name is Bruce Lee." And I said, what does he know? 20, 21 years old. He said, no, you got to see him. He's phenomenal. And I met him a few years back, and he convinced me how good he was. And I suggested Wally J to have him to be the feature martial arts guest. And I looked around, and it was a room full of Kung Fu guys there that I knew, traditional Kung Fu guys. And so they all happy and talking, and then they introduced Bruce, and he came on the stage, and he started doing all kinds of traditional forms. Northern style, southern style, you name it, he did it. Bits and pieces of it. It looked pretty good. Then when he's done, everybody clapped. And I looked at all the Sifu in the audience, they were happy. Then suddenly Bruce said, now let me ask you a question. How can you fight like that? It's dry land swimming. And I looked again at those guys, they turned red in their face, and their smile turned to frustration, anger, and said, I'm gonna tell you what I mean. Okay, so anybody wanna stop my jab, my finger jab, come up here, and I'm not hit you in the eye, but I'll hit you on the forehead. So a couple of big old football player type jumped on the stage and get into a stance, and Bruce said, boom! And then they said, no, try again, maybe you're not ready. You ready? The guy said, yeah, boom! He got that thing off so fast, they couldn't even react. Then the guy, like embarrassed, get off the stage and said, anybody else want to do that? So another guy jumped on the stage, and same thing. And then he went on and on, talk about the difference between classical and non-classical, and he talked about how you got to close the gap and all the theories. But at that time, he just using modified Wing Chun, actually. He didn't go into the boxing-based AKD yet. And so afterwards, Jimmy told me, he said, he's going to stay with me over the weekend, and maybe you can come and join the meeting. We're going to meet on Monday. And then anyway, on Monday, I went there. I drove all the way and met him at Jimmy's house. And I remember there was Alan Joe, Bob Baker, and David Cox, and a couple other guys there. And so the first thing Bruce did was had Bob Baker to put a telephone book on his chest and hit him with a 1-inch punch and knocked him over the couch, and the guy's feet almost broke the glass. Then he proceeded to put on a blindfold and started to doing seesaw and slapping everybody on the chest and knocking them around. So I was sort of impressed with all that as I watched it, and then after the demonstration, we talked, and he took in questions, and then finally Jimmy said that Bruce is going to come down in a year or so to live with him, and will offer classes in Wing Chun Kung Fu. And in the meantime, I'm still pastor at the church in Vallejo, and of course, during my ministry there, I was always very interested in martial arts, and so I met another martial artist there. His name was William Chung, and he was a student of William Chow in Hawaii. Chow was known to be Ed Parker's instructor, and he was big on breaking bricks and all that, and he had knuckles like 2 ball pin hammer, but he would punch the bricks all day long, you know, like that. And so that was the beginning of my martial arts experience and ministry all together. And so about a year after he did that demonstration, he moved to Oakland in 1964. And so I started going out there when he got there, and I was there about 3 or 4 days, and he wrote me a letter later and wanted to know if I would be willing to train as one of his associate assistant instructors. But in the meantime, I started flourishing in Stockton. The ministry was going very good. And one thing I realized too, there's a relationship between homiletics, which is preaching, and martial arts. And I believe that you got to keep it simple. And that's where Bruce and I resonate. And Bruce Lee really, I felt respected me because he got me a cover story in Black Belt magazine, and he helped me with the Toilet Fut Silam book. So looking back, I did a lot of, he helped me with a lot of things that I would not have done had I done it on my own. So what he wanted me to do in the magazine interview was to show that certain things don't work, and everybody thought it would. And I got the idea, the hang of it. And so I showed how the traditional would handle a kick or a punch, defense, and then how I would handle it from a standpoint of free fighting. And after the interview, the owner of the magazine wanted to see if I would write some books on what I just shared, and also on the Toilet Fut Silam Kung Fu system that I knew. And I told him, I said, Mito, I said, I'm not really a writer. So he said, well, let me show you something. So he brought out 3 books written by Yuen Ri, who was a Taekwondo expert. And I looked at it through flipped through the 3 books, and I said, Mito, all this is just pictures in there and captions. He said, well, you know, martial arts people don't read, they just look at pictures. And I said, well, if that's the case, I can do that. I can just, you shoot the picture, I will capture it. So Bruce was standing there and he said, hey Leo, I'm gonna help you out with that. I'll take care of it, help you out. I said, okay. So the first book that we was going to do was, was the Silam Kung Fu book. And so I did the form and the preliminary stuff on Saturday. We were shooting it on Saturday. And then we did the breakdown, and Bruce, I didn't know how to break it down to use it for free fighting. And Bruce showed me, and he made his own version of it. So I followed it. And so we worked Saturday night, we worked till Sunday morning, about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. And I know Linda Lee mentioned that when we got together last time, that you and Bruce stayed up till 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning. I said, yeah, and I crashed out on your couch. That book came out after Bruce helped me put it together. I didn't expect too much money. And then, you know, lo and behold, the 3 months came in, and I asked Bruce, I said, you think Mito's going to send me the money? He said, no, Mito's going to, because he's my student, he's going to treat you right. And I got a check one day, and it was $8,000. And then later Bruce called me up and said, hey, Mito wants to do another book, would you want to do Toilet Fut? I said, sure. And then I came down, I think in December of 73 or 72, and we worked on the book again, and Bruce helped me to break down the application part, and so I gave him credit for that in that book. I said dedicate to Bruce for helping put together this, and then he also gave me the history of it, which I have the letter that he wrote with the history, and then when the book came out, it did pretty good too. It didn't do the 100,000 copy as it's still on Kung Fu, but it did about 50,000 copies, I think, and I got a nice little check there for a few years, and so Bruce helped me to become a writer, and so we share a lot together with boxing, you know, the punching skills and the footwork and all that. But it didn't really resonate with Bruce until after he had that fight with the Wong Topman fight, and then he realized that the Wing Chun forward blast was limited, and I suggested that what I would do if I was fighting the same guy, I would, you know, grab him by the neck and bring him back so he don't run, and punch him out. And so Bruce, I think, took that to heart, and he began to practice boxing. In fact, the very next day, he hung a chain, hung a leather glove from a chain, and he would bounce around Muhammad Ali and punch the thing around. Well, anyway, he began to take a love to Ali because he studied all his 8mm film. And in the meantime, I discovered the tremendous skill that Bruce Lee had, not so much his physical prowess, but what made his physical prowess so daunting was the fact that he had a tremendous creative mind, and that's what impressed me. He and I were at a restaurant in Chinatown, LA, and while we were waiting for the food, he would sit at a table and he would tap with his finger on the table. And I kept looking at him and I said, it looks kind of weird, him doing that. I said, I thought he had a nervous tic. And then I asked him, I said, Bruce, what are you doing? You keep tapping there, are you nervous? He said, no, I'm looking at that guy over in the corner and I'm anticipating when he's gonna put food in his mouth. And I want to tap just as he's thinking about putting food in his mouth. And he said, this is what I call the initial move. And when you stand, and then when we went outside, he showed me what he meant. He said, for instance, you're in front of me, and the moment you make, you bat an eye, or you move your shoulder just a little bit, I'm gonna hit you. That's hitting the initial move. Because it doesn't make any difference how fast you are, how powerful you are. If I hit you on the initial move, I abort your attack. You know, one of the things that I know about Bruce Lee as I reflect back, I owe him a lot of things. He made a writer out of me when I had no confidence in being a writer. And he inspired me to become an actor. I don't ever want to see you guys again. He did much for me. And I noticed Bruce is that way. He might have been, before he became a big star, a lot of people complained. They said, how can you stand him? He's cocky, he brags all the time, he's obnoxious. But down deep, beyond all that, was a good, generous person. For instance, Jimmy Lee discovered he had cancer, lung cancer, and he was in need of money. So Bruce volunteered to help him write a book on Wing Chun Kung Fu. And when the book came out, with Bruce helping him out, it sold a lot of copies, much more than my Siu Lam Kung Fu book. And so that helped Jimmy Lee with his medical and other expenses. And then I wanted to pay him back, but I didn't know how. So one day I asked him, I said, Bruce, I have a drawing course. I bought this famous artist. I said, I can give you the course if you want to. And he said, yeah, I could use it. And he said, I'll send Bob Baker over to pick it up. So Bob Baker came over to my house and I gave him the course. And you know what? It wasn't too long later, he drew these drawings of kicking position and all that. At the suggestion of Bruce Lee, develop my boxing skills, expand on it, and like he said, to learn a few kicks and learn some grappling. But I went beyond that because I watched other people, what they did, but I didn't try to accumulate like everybody else does, but I just how they did it, and how I can take what I have and counter everything they had. And so when I came back from Hong Kong in 1974, a year after Bruce died, I was there in August the 1st of 1974, and I was able to meet up with Unicorn Chan and Chaplain Chang, who was on Enter the Dragon, and I started to think about my martial art, not Taekwondo, not karate, not Siu Lam or Tole Fut, but my martial arts. And Chaplain Chang had already told me that, you can call your art Wei Kuen Do, the way of integrated fist. So the psychodynamic art of free fighting, Wei Kuen Do. And that book sold quite a few copies, and I self-published. And that's when I decided to start my own publishing company. And I did over 25 martial arts books through the company, and 25 inspirational books. So they interviewed me, and he picked me up from the hotel. And on the way to the interview, he said, by the way, what style is your martial arts? And I said, well, I don't know, Chaplain. I said, I've done so many things. I boxed, I did Tole Fut, Siu Lam, Wing Chun, and all these things. He said, well, at the end, the interview, the guy's going to interview, you're going to ask, what style do you do? And you just say to him, Wei Kuen Do. I said, well, what's that? He said, way of the integrated fist. He said, you're taking all these things together and put it into one. It's like Wei means stomach in Chinese. And that's where all the food's assimilated. So this is, in Wei Kuen Do, you assimilate all the different styles into one. And so Wei Kuen Do, Kuen means fist and Do means Wei. And I said, oh, okay. So sure enough, at the end of the interview, the interviewer asked me, what is your system? I said, Wei Kuen Do. And that was the birth of Wei Kuen Do in August of 1973. On July the 20th, 1973, I was in Stockton taking a nap. And the radio was on, or TV was on. And suddenly, the announcer said, I have a special announcement. Actor, martial artist Bruce Lee just passed away. And I was half asleep, and I jumped up out of bed, sit there on the edge and watch the newscast. And immediately I called Danny Insano, who knew Bruce pretty well and practiced with him and was in the demonstration. And because I was a very good friend to Danny's father and mother, because we used to go to church together. And Danny's father was 100 years old, and his mother was 90 something. And anyway, I called Danny up, and so I came down to LA right away. And what I did was picked him up at his place, and we went to eat lunch. And while we were there, we were both kind of half mourning about Bruce's death, and so we were sharing our stories with each other, and it made me feel pretty good. But I felt a great loss. I felt that my brother was gone, and I just couldn't reconcile with it until years later. But I always thought, here's one of the three people that I impacted my life. My father's gone, And of course, Jesus Christ lived forever in my life. And then now, Bruce Lee's gone. And then I began to see all these things that come out, and some, I didn't think, I think when Bruce Lee was around, he would have been pissed off. But that has a strong impact on me. And then afterwards, I realized, I said, as long as I do not exploit his name, but share with the world what he really was, that his spirit will live forever. And that's what I've been doing. And so, and by the way, I want to also say, I realized I didn't do it on purpose, but my anniversary is on July the 20th, 1985, when we got married. So we've been married 35 years. And I'm here doing this segment about Bruce Lee on my anniversary. And now again, I think about it. I didn't plan this out, but now I think about it. I said, hey, we're here with Bruce Lee's anniversary of his death, but I would say not his death, but rather his anniversary of his transition from life physical to life eternal.